Today I am with Bill Angelos, who I have met recently, but who is already a great friend. We both share a great passion to understand, to study, and to disseminate the writings, the teachings, and the dialogue that took place between 20th century's two greatest thinkers, Jiddu Krishnamurti and Dr. David Bohm. Bill, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, it's difficult to say what I am now. I'm basically a writer. I always have been. I started out in this city as a writer in television, a comedy writer, comedy and music, if you will. And I just assumed that was going to be my life work, but things changed, as you know, so.
Excellent. How did you come in contact with Krishnamurti and Bohm?
Well, my writing partner and I were working in New York, where one day we got a call from the woman who we would be working with for the next 5 years of our lives, a very famous comedienne named Carol Burnett. And she and her husband called and told us they had just signed a contract to do an extended series for CBS television, and would we like to go to Hollywood with them. So we packed our bags and went to Hollywood. And the show was this was in 1967, by the way, and the show was an immediate success and stayed on television. It was the longest running show of its kind in television history, I think 11 or 12 years. After the first year, I got married. And after a few months of marriage, Carol Burnett gave my wife and I a very unusual gift, a visit to an astrologer, a quietly famous astrologer in Hollywood who consulted the stars, if you will, the movie stars as opposed to the other stars. And we went and we met this woman, and my wife was pregnant at the time. So the astrologer suggested that a masseuse. And the masseuse came to our home, and she was a very unusual woman, beautiful, perhaps in her 60s at the time. I had been born in Germany and had been born ill, but also quite psychic, even as a child. In order to cure the illness, she was taken to a group of people who were an extension of an ancient, I think it was an ancient Persian culture extended from Zoroaster, and they were called Mazdaznan, and their discipline was based on certain breathing techniques and strict dietary techniques that related to the seasons. And it did indeed heal her. And however, along came Hitler, who outlawed Mazdaznan, and things got very rough in Germany. So her parents, in concert with a very famous yogi in the United States named Paramahansa Yogananda, brought Charlotte over to the United States. And although she never joined his ashram, through him and then by just being present, she began to meet a number of different masters, gurus, call them what you will. And as she would come to our home, one by one, for no reason at all, she started bringing me books. And the first book was by a man, Yogananda, and I started reading it, and I had no interest in it whatsoever. And she saw that, she brought me another book, and this one was by a man named Meher Baba, who was rather visible at the time because he was the model for the rock groups, The Who. The rock opera they wrote called Tommy was based on Meher Baba's life. However, as a very interesting man, but as I read more into him, he decided he was the manifestation of God. So I said bye-bye to Baba. And then she brought me this book that in fact had been owned by her mother. And she had it, I remember it was wrapped in a purple sash, an old book. And the title of it was Krishnamurti. but it was the subtitle that intrigued me. The subtitle was "Man is His Own Liberator." Well, I didn't, whatever liberation meant, I certainly didn't need it. I was at the top of my game, a big-time comedy writer in television. I had a beautiful wife. We now had a beautiful son living in a beautiful home. Why would anyone need liberation? And from what? So then I started reading his story, which is what the book was about. And it was a most unusual story. He was discovered, if you will, as a ragamuffin child with a group of other children running along a river in India by a very well-known gentleman at the time who was head of an organization called the Theosophical Society, which still exists. But at the time it was quite a well-known organization, and some of its members were some of the most visible people in all cultures. Thomas Edison was a member. Oscar Wilde was a member. And the purpose of the Theosophical Society was to meld Eastern and Western religions, if you will, and their disciplines. And they also had a prophecy in their teachings that said that at some point a world teacher would appear. Well, this man, one of the heads of the society named C.W. Leadbeater, one day he happened to see these ragamuffin children running along the beach, and one of them, he said, he was obviously he claimed he was psychic. He said this child had an extraordinary aura. So they brought him up into I think it was in Adyar, India is where it was, and the head of the Theosophical Society. And they took him under their wing because they said that he, in fact, would become the manifestation of the world teacher. And they started building a religion around him. Well, the boy was about 12 when they found him, and there are pictures of him that when you see pictures of him, he was skinny, quite dull. When people talked to him, he didn't quite understand what they were saying, and he was often beaten for not doing the proper things in school. But then he started to grow and he started to change. And but into his teens and into his 20s, he suddenly started seeing this religion which was growing around him. And I believe it was about 32 when he saw, and in fact I should tell you that, again, I was still writing comedy, and I was doing a television show at NBC in Burbank, California. This was after I met him, and apparently he had been invited to be interviewed by a gentleman named Robert Abernathy, who was then a commentator at NBC, but he would later become the head of the Religion and Ethics Department of PBS, the PBS network. And Krishnamurti knew I was working in television at NBC, in fact on a Bing Crosby special, whoever remembers the great Bing Crosby. And he asked me to meet him and join him in the interview, and of course I did. And we went into Mr. Abernathy's room, and he had a book open of verbatim talks of Krishnamurti, and we sat. And the first question he asked, he said, "Sir, by what authority do you say these things?" And I was waiting for Krishnamurti to respond by saying, "There are no authorities in matters of the spirit," but he didn't say that. And but he began to talk about what I told you, being discovered, if you will, and being brought up by these people with a religion growing around him. And then he said, and then someone mentioned the word Messiah, and the circus began. Well, I was sitting in the room, and when I heard that, I knew for a fact that this gentleman that I had met was quite an unusual man, with a great sense of humor, by the way, and perhaps we'll get into that later.